Hi, I'm Professor Green, and today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3. This is an exciting chapter because we talk more about external analysis, industry structure, competitive forces, and strategic groups. And so let me go ahead and put in slideshow mode and we can get started. So, for many of you, you're already familiar with a good portion of this chapter, the pestle analysis, right? Political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal. And it's used to evaluate the impact of all these external factors on the firm. Very often we do it focused on a particular country. So if you're doing an analysis for Hewlett Packard, for example, and they're doing business here in the United States, you'll do a pestle for the US. If you want to do it for Hewlett Packard entering Japan, you would do the pestle for Japan. I'll go through that, but I'm not going to lie to you. I'll go somewhat quickly because I think many of you have used the pestle in your international business courses. We're also going to talk about learning objective number 2, where we differentiate the roles of firm effects and industry effects in determining for firm performance, right? So, what the firm can control, and then what is less in their control, what's happening in the industry. So, if we talk about American Airlines, what they can control within their organizations, but a lot that they can't control because that's happening to the whole entire airline industry. And so today we're also going to talk about Porter's five forces to explain the profit potential of different industries. And here's my son. You want to say hello? Hello, this is Rodney. Yeah, and
I do have one question.
okay, let me go ahead and pause my recording here. Hold on one sec. Great. Today is the first day of Advent here in California. And so Rodney needed to talk to me about his Advent calendar. And so we're differentiating the roles, right? Reporting, number 3 is applying Porter's 5 competitive forces to explain the profit potential of different industries. So this is, again, a super interesting way to look at what's happening in industry, who are the competitors, who are the suppliers, what's the future of an industry? Does an organization even want to start in this industry? Because they might have options to change industries depending on what their business idea is. And Michael Porter is one of the most famous, probably if not the most famous economist and professor from Harvard Business School. And if there's one key takeaway from business school, you should know about Porter's five forces. We'll just talk about that today. We're also going to talk about how competitive industry structure shapes rivalry. And so, right, do the competitors sometimes work together? Do they sometimes work totally in silos? It really depends on the industry and the organizations. Number 5, we're going to describe the strategic role of complements. I love this because, right, we have ideas, we have products that have a complement. Like bananas have a complement of a supermarket, right? You can't necessarily sell a banana without a supermarket. And then number 6, explain the 5 choices required for market entry. So when you start to open up a new business in a new market, what are your options? Number 7, appraising the role of industry dynamics and industry conversions in shaping the firm's external environment. And so how is the industry going to be changing potentially in the future? Will it merge with another industry? As we see again in the electric vehicle market, right? We have the EV battery industry or charging. Tesla thought that they were just going to go into creating vehicles, but then they decided to create these charging stations. And now there's kind of like a convergence for many of these organizations between the actual car and the charging station. And the last thing is generating a strategic group model to reveal performance differences between clusters of firms in the same industry. And so they'll talk a lot about the airline industry and how they use the example of like low cost carriers like Southwest and Spirit Airlines and how they're very different, how their business model is very, very different from mainstream, we'll call it for the moment, mainstream airlines like American Airlines, United Airlines, etc. So a really key part of this course, right, because we talk not only about Porter's five forces, we talk about competitive analysis, and we talk about just like what is an industry and how do we analyze industries. So the first section here is about external factors and how they impact a firm. And so again, yeah, the case is about Airbnb. And let me set my timer here because I want to make sure that I don't go over 30 minutes and bore you guys too much. I think it's super exciting, but we want to make sure that we keep it lively. The general environment is all about, that as I mentioned briefly in the learning outcomes that hmm, strategic leaders at the end of the day have like little control over the general environment, right? They control their organization, but the industry, the politics, the economics, etc. And that these macroeconomic factors are included in that, right? The legal systems, the environmental regulations, etc. We don't really control things about interest rates, exchange rates. But we have a lot as leaders, strategic leaders, we have a lot of influence on the task environment. So this is the composition of these strategic groups that we'll talk about throughout this chapter. And the structure of the industry, right? How, especially if you become a larger organization, you really can determine a little bit more as to how the industry moves and goes forward. So the group's environmental factors into six segments. So I said this pestle, the straightforward way to scan, monitor, and evaluate these external factors. They have put it into a nice little, um, not graph, but a way to explain this, how these six factors are around here. They affect your industry, right? Because the same politics accepts um, affects United Airlines as American Airlines, right? The same economic factors. And then within that industry, and also affects Southwest and Spirit Airlines. But then the strategic group, right? This is now separating American Airlines from Southwest Airlines because they, in theory, are have a different business model. And then you have the firm, right? So then the firm in particular is affected by certain things, more or less. Um, but as this chapter was saying, these six things are really out of your control. You just need to move with them as a strategic leader. So what are political factors? Again, I think you've studied this in international business. And so lobbying, public relations, litigation, political pressures often result in changes in like legislation. So we'll also see, if there's like for example, when President Trump came into office, there was a big change in higher education, a lot less funding from the federal government. So LMU, as an organization, was greatly affected by this change in politics. Hmm. Economic factors. These are growth rates, employment level rates, interest rates. So when you go to investigate for an organization what the environment is going to look like for them in a particular country, you need to look at all these things. Is the economy growing, right? I've done this exercise with my students in international business for many semesters now. I give them an opportunity to take one organization and decide where that organization should expand. And one of the first thing they look at is how quickly is the country moving forward. And Switzerland being a great example, so many of my students have said, yeah, whatever, almost any product, yeah, let's invest in Switzerland because it is moving forward. Things like places like Venezuela, not moving forward very quickly. You want to look at employment levels, interest rates, how easy is it to borrow money, inflation and deflation, as we've seen in the United States. So the last 10 years, we've had quite a bit of inflation. And it's been a reason why a lot of people have pulled out their investment here in the United States because it's less predictable as to whether or not their investment will come back. And then, of course, exchange rates is a great way to look at what the economic factors look like. And now the sociocultural factors. And so these are always fun, I think, to look at, right? So Um, what are the cultures, the norms, the values? How do people do things in that particular country or in that area? These things are constantly in flux, right? As you can, of my son, I often see, he values things differently than I do. Um, so these strategic leaders should monitor these trends. Like, where could their product do best, depending on the society cultures, but also population characteristics. One example is how the Hispanics have a growing percentage of the U.S. demographics. And so places like Telemundo and products that cater to the Hispanic market are a great opportunity for growth. Great. I need to get something to drink here. So societies, cultures, exactly. And such a big part of how things are done in a particular area or country or region. And then the technological factors. So, an application of knowledge to create, are there new processes and products that the company needs to be aware of in their environment again? Are there innovations in process technology? And one that's a few that have been big in recent decades are lean manufacturing, right? So having limited waste when you manufacture goods. Six Sigma quality, so having like 99% good quality, having limited returns and sendbacks. Then other things like genetic engineering, AI, quantum computing, etc. So again, things to be aware of. And then also for things like Amazon, places like Amazon organizations, drones, right? Having packages delivered could be a great opportunity for them in a particular area, or region, or country. Also, we need to know about wearable devices. My son will get one of those for Christmas, a new smartwatch, and high-performing electric cars. So, and obviously, advances in AI and machine learning are such a big factor of the world today. And so, let's move on to the ecological or environmental factors. This is where we talk about, natural environment, climate change, eh, sustainable economical growth. And so, is your product, is your organization going to be affected by these things? Especially if you're creating uh, electric vehicles in places like China, where the smog is out of control, it could be a huge demand for EVs. And then so we look at the relationship between the organizations and the environment, and sometimes it can be moving against the environment, and also it can also be providing opportunities. And then the next one and the last one is the legal, which is such a big part of it. And it really forces us to look at what are the laws in that particular country or region? What are the mandates, the regulations, what's happened in the past when it's related to your product or your organization? And so, as we see now with time, there's less regulation, which is a good thing for airlines and telecom and energy and trucking. And as they say, as we said with the political one, political and legal will often go hand in hand. And so, coming back now to learning objective number two, the industry versus the firm effect, right? So, differentiating kind of how much you can affect as part of an organization, and sometimes how much is just really out of your control. So, the industry effects can describe the economic structure of the entire industry. So, the airline industry overall. These are elements that are common to United Airlines, Spirit Airlines, etc. These are entry and exit barriers, right? How quickly and easily can you start up a company? How quickly and easily can you shut down your organization? The number and the size of the companies, the types of products and services that you can offer. But then you have firm effects, which are very particular to the organization. These attribute firm performance to your actions. So this is where you have a lot of control. And it's much more important than the industry effects. And it doesn't say it on this slide here, but we talk about corporate versus business strategy from the last chapter. Corporate strategy, is where the CEO sits and what the decisions that he makes, and he decides which industries to compete in. But then the business strategists, they decide how to compete in an industry, right? So I thought that was also really helpful, so that CEOs make some decisions, but it's really up to the business leaders that make a lot of these decisions. And so firm performance effects, right? So that the decisions that a firm makes is up to, is at 55% of the outcome of the organization. That's a lot. That's more than half, right? Industry is like 20%. So a good amount still, but not as much. And then there's 25% of other effect. These are unexplained variances, business cycle effects, right? Recessions, depressions, etc. They affect not only the industry, but all organizations around the world. So you can see as a CEO, you have a lot of responsibility because the 55%, but at the same time, you don't have all the responsibility. So talking about industry and industry analysis. So again, as I said, this chapter is talking a lot about industry overall and a little bit less about the firms or, a little bit how the firms engage with the industry, but we're talking first about the industry in the big picture. So, what is an industry? Maybe that's not clear yet, but hopefully it's becoming clear. This is a group of incumbent companies. So, companies that are already existing and they make up a particular industry. Again, airlines, Southwest, etc. The chocolate industry, my favorite. Lint is what I just got for my son for Advent. Because last year I got him some chocolates from Target and they weren't very good. But then there's the Hershey, etc. So, probably 20, 30 different companies in the chocolate industry. So an industry is more or less the same set of suppliers and buyers, right? So, right, I will buy different types of chocolate. Also, Nestle and Hershey, for the most part, source from similar people for the cocoa and the milk, etc. And there's similar products and services, right? At the end of the day, while we have milk chocolate and dark chocolate and M&Ms and things like that, they're pretty similar. And so, to analyze an industry, we need to identify an industry's profit potential, right? How quickly is the industry going to grow, and how can you make money? How quickly can you make money in an organization? Oh, here's Rodney again with his chocolate. Like, do you have an update? I was just telling my students about the chocolate. Would you like to tell them something?
How do we open this?
Okay, let's go ahead and take a break. Okay, great. So as I was mentioning, and here Rodney is going to stay for our industry analysis. Um, and you just had some of your Lindt chocolate, right? We were talking about.
Tell me get the laundry.
Yeah, in a few minutes. It's not ready yet. And so we're going to identify the industry's profit potential and then drive implications for a firm's position within that industry. So a really important thing to identify is like how is that organization going to measure up with its competitors and what does it need to be aware as it enters the industry? So on this slide, we talk about strategic positioning. And we have a simple formula, simple from first glance at least. A firm's ability to first create value for customers while containing the costs. So that difference is what we're looking for. So we want to create a large gap between the value and the costs because that will hopefully create a lot of profits for the organization, allow the organization to grow. And so the value to generate a large gap, the value of the firm's product or services creates uh, yeah, as I mentioned, and then the cost to produce it. And so now we're going to jump into what the most exciting part is the five forces model. As I said, Michael Porter is probably the single most important person that you need to know when graduating from business school. He helps strategic leaders understand the potential of different industries. So how big will airline industry grow over the next couple of years? The EV industry, the chocolate industry. And then how can a firm position themselves to gain and then sustain, hopefully, competitive advantage against the other competitors in that industry? And so to understand this model, we've talked about two key insights. First, competition is viewed more broadly in the five forces model, so not, specifically. So there's some assumptions here. And that's the first one is that we talk about like kind of broad competitors. And then the next one is profit potential and how it's a function of the five competitive forces. And so we're going to look at those five forces here in a minute. Hmm. And so, yeah, a very famous model. When we can start amongst at the top, threat of new entrants. So you want to be aware of how quickly or easily it is for other organizations to enter the market. And like if you're a vendor on Amazon, it's decently easy because all you need is a couple minutes to sign up and sell your product, especially if you're selling things like baseball caps or hair bands. Right, Rodney loves those types of things, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
baseball caps, right? So the threat of new entrants is very, very high. But the airline industry, for example, the threat of new entrants is very low because there's a lot of ramp up that happens when you have to enter the airline industry and start an airline. Then, and so then I won't go into each so much detail because there'll be a note, an entire slide on each. But then we're going to talk about the bargaining power of suppliers. We're going to talk about the bargaining power of buyers. Okay, bye, Rodney. See you later. Can you close the door? Yeah. And the threat of substitute products or services. And then, of course, how this all affects rivalry among the existing competitors.
Need to put something somewhere.
Right. So here we talk, deep diving into that threat of entry, the risk that potential competitors in the future will enter an industry. This lowers industry profit potential because now there are more competitors. So, more people selling hair bands on Amazon allows market share to go to those people. So you have less of a chance of making money. And it increases spending among the incumbent firms because now if you're selling hair bands, you need to advertise more. You need to make sure that potential customers know why your hair bands are better, etc. And entry barriers. So um, how incumbents can benefit from these entry barriers, right? So if you're already in the industry, that as you grow, you can see that economies of scale that the larger an organization, you can spread your fixed costs, for example, over your units. And so if you're already in the industry and you're growing and you've already moved towards very efficient economies of scale, that's something that's positive for your organization. Also, network effects, the positive impact of one user on others. So if you're already in an industry, you already have your network set up of your suppliers and your buyers and your contacts and your vendors. And so, really important to understand that there's power and value in having a network. Um, Also, incumbents can benefit from customer switching costs. So this example is with Salesforce. So Salesforce is a CRM product, customer relationship management product. And while the product is probably not perfect for all organizations, there's a huge ramp up cost if an organization decides to abandon Salesforce, and move to another CRM product. So again, Salesforce benefits from this barrier to entry. Capital requirements. So how much money does it take to get into the industry? The example that they give in the book are those gigafactories that Tesla does, and how, you need to spend millions and millions, if not billions, to create these factories. So that's a good thing. Um, and then also we're talking about here um, advantages independent of size. And so brand loyalty technology, proprietary technology, preferential access, favorable locations, learning experiences. So the whole idea that there are advantages of that it doesn't matter what size firm you are, there are advantages of your particular industry. The government policy, also a barrier to entry. So if you're talking about setting up organizations in India, for example, um, until recently, the country of India required that all foreign organizations entering India needed to set up a joint venture. They weren't able to set up a wholly owned subsidiary that was against the law. And so that would be tricky because maybe you don't want to share your information or share your technology with an firm from India. China requires this as well. A lot of the times they want you to joint venture with an organization. Tesla got around this. There was a loophole for Tesla, but that is very rare. And the last barrier to entry potentially for for new firms entering an industry is the credible threat of retaliation. And so, how existing organizations can potentially engage in price wars. So, if they see a new company coming on, they can say, like, oh, okay, we're just going to reduce our prices for a short period of time so people can become more and more familiar with our brand. And when they go to buy again, they'll only buy from us. I see that all the time on Amazon. Um, and it works. I'm not going to lie to you. I bought a dog leash the other day, and there are so many dog leashes on Amazon, but I had already bought one because it was on a flash deal a couple weeks ago. And then I went back to buy a second one because I liked it so much. And I thought, oh, I don't really have to buy the same brand, but I did because I knew that it worked. Power of suppliers. And so these are this is the next section of Porter's five forces. Pressures that industry suppliers can exert on an industry's profit potential. So, um, yeah, so many suppliers, right? We talk about cement, we talk about people supplying to Walmart in this chapter. Um, suppliers will lower an industry profit potential if suppliers demand higher prices. No, or suppliers capture part of the economic value created. Sometimes the supplier will move into the buyer's industry, um, hmm, or there are no available substitutes for those products, so they have a lot of control. So you always have to be careful of who your suppliers are and how much leverage they have. The third area of the Porter's Five Forces is the power of buyers, right? Industry customers. So again, this lowers industry profit potential if buyers get price discounts. This reduces your revenue. Buyers demand higher quality and or service, raising production costs. And in a situation where buyers are price sensitive, like for the products, a lot of the products we buy on Amazon, the buyer's purchase represents a significant portion of their procurement budget. So, right, if they move the price just a little bit, um, then you will have less buyers. And there are particular products that are very sensitive. Airline tickets can be decently sensitive. Chocolate can be decently sensitive. Um, electricity, no, because we usually just depend on one provider. Cell phone providers, not very quite price sensitive because it's such a pain to change cell phone providers, etc. Anyway, buyers earn low profits or short of cash, right? And and buyers the product quality is not much affected by the quality of their inputs. So the example that they give in the book is Walmart, how they can move from Rubbermaid to Sterilite plastic containers very easily because it's pretty much the same product. And it's just a matter of negotiating with one company over the other. And that's why, and that's my experience too, that so many of these of these suppliers are sitting next to Walmart in their offices in the southeast of the United States because they want to have that relationship because that really depends is all that the who Walmart works with is really dependent on the relationship rather than the product itself. And then the fourth area is this threat of substitutes. It meets the same basic customer need, right, but in a different way. And it's available from outside the given industry. So right. Yeah. And so like at the airline industry, again, cruises, right? That the airline industry, you're talking about planes and things like that, but a cruise is a substitute, right? People can still go on vacation, but they don't necessarily need to take an airplane. And so here, really important to be careful about who that substitute could be. Talk about software versus professional services. The taxes one, that was a good one. You can have TurboTax, which is a software, but you can also use H&R Block, right, which is the actual person that you go to in an office to help do your taxes. So it's a substitute. And they talk about gasoline, biofuel, energy drinks, right, versus coffee, same effect in theory, for the most part. Video conferencing versus business travel, right? Zoom took on such a major role because it was a substitute for travel during the pandemic. Wireless phone services versus internet-based services like Skype or Google Voice. Um, yeah, and you have to talk, then you have to, if there is a particular substitute that you're afraid of, you have to look at like, are the switching costs, worth it for customers? Is there a performance trade-off, et cetera? So again, a lot of interesting things to look at. Then there's rivalry among the competitors. So we talk about here the intensity in which companies in the same industry jockey for market share and profitability. And this to me was totally new when I came to academia, that I thought that all universities kind of were like happy to support each other. And I quickly learned that no, actually, um, Dean Smith, she never posts about her alma maters. She doesn't even like mention anybody else on in her post, even if she's at an event with the president of USC or something like this. She doesn't even mention that. So there is a lot of rivalry amongst these competitors, and so it can range from genteel to cutthroat. I'd say um, when I was in the banking industry, it was pretty genteel. We went to events all the time with JP Morgan people or in software. It was pretty low key. When I worked for Salesforce, Salesforce was kind of like powerhouse, so it was kind of easy to be nice to other smaller organizations. The construction industry, yeah, that was a little more cutthroat when I was in that. I worked for Clark Construction, and definitely there was a lot of, anxiety, excitement when we spoke to or heard from anybody from Turner Construction, for example. So there are other forces in the model that pressure this rivalry, really like how competitive it is because of, for the academia, maybe it's so competitive is because just there are so many schools and not enough students at the end of the day, and it's expensive. And then the stronger the forces, the stronger the competitive intensity. Competitive industry structure is defined by the number and size of competitors, the firm's degree of pricing power, the type of product or service, commodity or differentiated product, and the height of entry barriers. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Let's do one more slide and then we'll take a break in this version. This is where we talk about the industry competitive structures. Here is perfect competition where there are many small firms. Firms are price takers, commodity product, low entry barriers. This is the pet websites. The book talks about. There's so many websites out there to order pet products. The next one is monopolistic competition. This is about laptops and how Apple became a leader. There are many firms, but there's some pricing power, and the products are slightly differentiated. Like the HP laptop is different from an Apple laptop, which is different from a Dell or IBM laptop. Medium entry barriers, oligopoly. Um, this is few large. This is like FedEx and UPS. A little bit of pricing power, not much, because they need to stay in line with their competitors. Differentiated product, right? FedEx is more international, UPS is more domestic. There are high entry barriers, right? Because you need to know about all the regulations and stipulations and have warehouses and transportation routes, and then a monopoly. Here we have like utilities, and like in Europe, they consider Google being in a monopoly because it's pretty much the only search engine that people use. So let's go ahead and take a break, and I will see you in section 2 of this recording of chapter 3.